When I was 9 years old and in third grade, I had a bully. I had just transferred to the city public school, and the first day the bully had found out that I'd previously been attending a private school, and the bully didn't like that. I had bullies before, and I've had plenty since, but this bully was unique. This bully was my third grade teacher. She was a morbidly obese toad of a woman who, while escorting me to the nurse's office my first day, asked me what school I previously had gone to. I said, High Meadows, and she said grimly, "Is that a private school?" I replied that it was, not knowing at the time that many people regarded private school kids as being snooty and stuck up. She was one of those people in the extreme. The next day, we were walking in line down the hall and passing underneath a low-hanging sign with directions on it. Some of the kids were jumping up and tapping it as we went under it, so when I had the chance, I did the same. My teacher wheeled about and laid into me. I don't remember everything she said, but it began with, "Jordan, I don't know what they taught you at your private school, but around here." And so it went. She would look for any excuse to bless me out in front of the class, and I say without exaggeration that her face would turn purple when she screamed at me. I was behind in math, so I had to go to resource several times a week. On those days, she would give assignments after I'd left the room and then flunk me for not having done them. One time, we were all supposed to pick a book from the shelf to sit and read for a while, and I pulled out this Dick and Jane style book that was obviously meant for younger readers, but I was more interested in the vintage Norman Rockwell style illustrations and wanted to pore over them for a while, being interested in art at the time. She took the book away from me, got the class's attention, and held it up for them to laugh at my choosing of a baby book. Another time we were having free time and I was sitting by myself and drawing. I had a pile of drawings that I'd finished next to me on my desk. My teacher came up to me and, without speaking, tore my drawings to shreds, threw them down on the desk, and walked off. Those are just a few examples. I don't want to give in any more, though I could. Suffice to say, I had never been more scared of an adult outside of my father, but even that fear was limited to when I was about to be punished for something. My third grade teacher's constant vicious abuse was a dark cloud that loomed over my head, ever ready to slam down lightning bolts of furious rage to vent her disgust at my having committed the unforgivable crime of having attended a private school. 20 years later, I reconnected with a third grade classmate via Facebook who told me that our teacher had died of a heart attack several years later. It was oddly jarring news. As an adult, I'd secretly wished I'd run into her and be able to really give her a piece of my mind. As it stands, I try to take some solace in thinking that maybe she's looking up at me and seething. In my third grade class, there was a window that looked out over a covered walkway that surrounded the building. I used to wish I had the nerve to jump out of that window and land on the top of that walkway and run away, like in the beginning of Prince of Persia 2. Years prior, I'd seen The Last Starfighter and, like the main character, longed for an alien spacecraft to land and take me away to fight in an intergalactic war. I always daydreamed that if I ever had the nerve to land on that walk and run like hell to the other end, a shuttle of some kind would swoop in and catch me before I fell off the far end. But the fantasy stopped there. I didn't know what would happen after that. I didn't even know what the spaceship would look like. My fantasy world would expand endlessly before me, and the exact make and model of my rescue ship defined down to the smallest detail when I opened the February 1993 issue of Nintendo Power. by Nintendo's own Benimaru Ito, the Star Fox comics were beautifully drawn with extraordinary detail work. Even without the story, they were the kind of drawings that one could pore over endlessly, lost in the lavish planetscapes and deeply emotive faces. But there was so much more than that. Everything about the layout and perspective suggested a sense of forward motion that would have confounded lesser cartoonists. But the story, however, was the most captivating element because it followed the classic arc of what Joseph Campbell would call the hero's journey. Fox McCloud is a master pilot outshined by his late father's legacy, who, banished by a limp-wristed government ready to kowtow to a ruthless madman, ekes out a living for himself as a Robin Hood-esque outlaw. He's summoned back to his homeworld by General Pepper, an old colleague of his father's who, having finally attained high enough rank to intercede, has made the executive decision to bring back the Lilat system's last hope. It has all the ingredients of a great space opera mixed with the smirking, high-fiving Top Gun camaraderie and the otherworldly psychedelia of the 60s new wave science fiction. And so my fantasy world was established. I imagined myself, at all of 9 years old, being whisked away to join Fox McCloud, Peppy, Falco, and Slippy for dogfight training on Corneria. Finally, I had a refuge for my mind, an escape beyond any I'd previously imagined, and a happy place I could go when my teacher was bearing down on me. I extended those comics further and further in my mind, sending Fox and Company on all new adventures, battling ever more bizarre intergalactic foes, but there was something else. I was fascinated by the burgeoning love story between Fox and Farrah Fennec. Yes, that's how it's pronounced. Look at the type of fox she is. It was the first time that I can recall being so enamored with the romantic undercurrent of the story, but it was forged with such wonderful fluidity. I remember specifically being enchanted with a sequence in which Andros makes a building-shattering appearance to taunt his opposition. Farrah is thrown to the floor, and when Fox and Company rush in, he's quick to assist her up, only to hold her tight at his side when he's gripped with the realization that the Star Fox team can fly a stealth attack on Andros's base by going through the black hole. Looking back, the sexual symbolism was obvious, but even then I had a suddenly strong sense of that moment. I could close my eyes, breathe in, and feel the spandex material of her bodysuit, the toned curvature of her form. Somehow the sense memory was there before I had any experiential context for it. My fantasy perception of Fox McCloud was curious, to say the least. I longed to be the fifth member of the Star Fox team, but my fantasy of my interpersonal relationship with Fox was sort of like Dennis the Menace to Mr. Wilson, that I would be the precocious scamp that was constantly getting on his nerves, but whose presence he begrudgingly accepted in recognition of my superior flying ability. I don't know why I envisioned it that way. Perhaps in my fantasy world I was casting Fox as the older brother I never had in real life, the semi-established but still developing older male presence halfway between childhood and adulthood. Whatever the case, Star Fox was my escape, at least as long as the comics were running. But shortly after the comics began to appear, the game was released as well. My dad noticed that there was a special event at Toys R Us near where we lived, and a coupon in the paper, so we went to check it out. Astronaut Buzz Aldrin was supposed to parachute in with the first copy, but it was crummy, cold, dreary weather, so he opted to arrive by limousine. We stood in line for what seemed like hours waiting to get into a tent that had been constructed in the parking lot, from which emanated the shrieking blasts of space battles and the whimsically anthematic rush of a cinematic J-pop inspired soundtrack. Eventually, tired of waiting, my dad flagged down a store employee who explained that no, the game was not actually for sale inside the tent, so we went inside the store to purchase an actual copy, which I still have to this day, along with a special control, which I still have to this day. Star Fox the game is compulsively playable. The R-Wing handles smoothly and efficiently, but with a nimble dexterity that gives one the impression that the designers truly had a deeply realized vision for this futuristic innovation. Being able to twirl those wafer-thin wings in and out of buildings evoked Muhammad Ali's old mantra, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. The game's polygon graphics added a new dimension, no pun intended, to the experience. There was an innately psychedelic quality to the game's presentation, but it was counterbalanced by the cold mathematic rigidity of a hard science fiction ethos. It was a fascinating dichotomy that I would later learn was inherent to anime as a style. For the time, however, it simply shaped my dreams. The look of Star Fox on the SNES was made possible by the Super FX chip, a microchip that allowed for 3D rendering in SNES games. Due to its costly nature, only a few games were ever made using the FX chip, and most of the others don't match the grandeur of Star Fox and have quickly been forgotten. Stunt Race FX was a fairly bare-bones monster truck racing game whose graphics were remarkably difficult to focus on. There was a poorly received port of Doom that captures neither the gameplay or graphics of the original and skips 5 of the original levels. Vortex is decent enough, but it just feels like a Star Fox clone. The one other Super FX chip game that really nails it is Super Mario World 2: Yoshi's Island. Using the chip to push lush, gorgeously rendered layers of colorful environment, Yoshi's Island was a critical and commercial success that ranks high among the already high standards set for Mario games. It's clever, funny, and beautiful to look at. There was a planned sequel to Star Fox for the SNES that never materialized, but that didn't stop me from pestering retailers all across the Southeast as to whether or not they'd heard anything about it. Like many Star Fox fans, I was able to pull a ROM image of that game in more recent years. The game is excellent, there's no doubt about that, but there's one problem. It's not canon. Similarly, when Star Fox 64 was released, I bought it, loved it, and finished all the paths in about a day and a half. It's incredible, no question. Just as the previous game had set a new standard for SNES games, Star Fox 64 raised the bar for its own system. But it's not canon. For me, the precious memories of my childhood nostalgia, the story of Star Fox is contained in Benimaru Ito's amazing comics. The storyline presented in the original Star Fox game is so bare bones that I was able to stretch Ito's narrative across it. I never touched Star Fox Adventures or the other subsequent games. They betrayed my Fox McCloud, the fascinating, richly complex character that carried me far and away from the abuse of my sick, depraved third-grade teacher. There was an episode of the more recent versions of the Twilight Zone series in which a young boy suffering at the hands of an abusive father is rescued when one of his favorite comic book characters comes to life. Looking back, I now realize that's what I had been doing with Fox McCloud. It's common for little kids to use imaginary friends as a special refuge in times of abuse, especially from that handed down by authority figures. I can remember how it felt to be screamed at in front of the whole class by that teacher. For example, a student preparing to give a presentation before the class wrote "quiet" on the board and was greeted with polite laughter from teacher and students alike. When I tried something similar, I was blessed out, and when she finally stopped bellowing, I stood there quivering, jaw clenched, trying not to cry in front of the whole class. The screaming was so loud, I heard something akin to amplifier feedback for an instant after she stopped. Moments like that were a constant, almost daily occurrence, and in every one of them, I stood there wishing I was stronger. I wished that I wasn't a little boy who could be rendered a whimpering, quivering mass by that revolting pig. I wished I was tough in those moments, tough enough to shout her down or at least have a sneering, cocky retort that would turn the tables on her. In those moments, Fox McCloud was there, and he always knew what to say. Thank you, Star Fox. You are the only hope for my world.